Hey there, my name is AJ Pickett and I make videos about role-playing games, and lots of them. I upload twice a week with a live stream every weekend. You can also find me on Subscribestar, Patreon and Discord, Facebook and Twitter. Also, there's an option to join the channel as a member, and I welcome any suggestions you have in the comments section down below. If you like this video or this channel, please subscribe and hit that like button if you would be so kind. There are dragons, a great variety of dragons. For those of you who have been subscribed to or following my channel for a few years now, you will have seen some of the strange dragons already, but this next category is on a whole different level to what you've seen before. I've stated many times that dragons are both mortal physical beings and spirits infused with elemental power. In many ways, they are like the reptilian version of the Genasi. But in the case of the Catastrophic dragons, this elemental aspect of their nature is taken to the full extreme and they become forces of barely contained destruction. It is not lost on me that a great number of D&D players will not have heard much about this category of dragons because they never played 4th edition of the game, and so this will be a very weird set of dragons for them, and I'm only too happy to introduce you to them and share what lore there is for them which can be shared across the different editions of the game. However, for the 4th edition fans, I must say that I'm not going to rehash some of the mess that 4th edition made of the existing lore in regards to the Dawn War, Dragon Gods, Primordials and so on. What I am going to do is provide the lore for them that allows them to make sense in the modern game. So no details about the Raven Queen specific primordials, and we're back to dealing with the elemental planes rather than an elemental chaos. That being said, grab yourself a tasty beverage, make yourself comfortable, we're about to get deeply nerdy. Please note, I am drawing from Dragon Magazine 424 and 425 digital editions, as well as the 3rd Monster Manual for 4th edition, and quoting from 1D4chan's page on Catastrophic Dragons, which is really good, you should check it out. All for this article, so there is a lot of direct quotes, as well as my own notes blended together, as is my usual way. Dragons were not always so clearly divided into chromatics and metallics, with a few neutral gem dragons on the outskirts. There were all sorts of different dragons long ago when the race was still young and exploring the multiverse. The Cobra dragon is one that springs to mind. Dragons exist on countless worlds across the primaterial plane. They are hyper-adaptable beings that can absorb traits from their environment and change their physical characteristics of their offspring while they gestate in their eggs, often immersing them in some sort of a nest of their chosen element and location, such as the briny waters of a sea coastal rock pool, for instance. Over time, dragons also adapted to what were once very strong and prevalent religious doctrines among their entire species, to the point where, as today, most consider the chromatics and metallics to be almost a different species, and the idea of these two working together is just unthinkable. Long ago, this wasn't the case. So there was a series of very bitter and heated religious wars that, in some worlds, weakened the species significantly and put them at a great danger of extinction when other powerful foes took advantage. You can really boil down the origin of the Catastrophic dragons from their perspective to this. Gods seem to favour the weaker races. Time and time again, the divine powers would seek out pathetic, squishy little humanoids to pin all their grand schemes and elaborate games on, and rather than the clearly superior choice, the dragons. Only when things got really bad did they turn to the dragons to save everyone else's necks. The metallic dragons all have something of an obsession with the humanoids and practically fall over themselves in their haste and eagerness to serve the gods. They flock to the banner of mighty Bahamut, and for most dragons it was either pick up the side of Bahamut or pick the side of Tiamat, who styled herself the god of all evil dragons. Well, some dragons decided they were all crazy, and the gods were nothing but petty interlopers from the realms of dreams and wishful thinking, who descended as parasites and craved the attention of mortals, and were doomed to squabble and fight among themselves forever and get everyone else murdered along the way, as they treated the multiverse like a sandpit full of toys for them to fight over. And so those dragons who were not falling for any of that bullshit, who could clearly see that the gods had no real business in the prime material plane, actively sought out the real custodians of that prime, the original source of power in the multiverse, who recognized in the dragons their true potential. These dragons sought out the primordials. There are, of course, a huge number of primordials, and they are an extremely diverse group, so there are thousands of tales of how the dragons approached them and exactly what happened next. But to cut many stories down to the basics, the dragons made deals and they got power, raw power, and a lot of it. Another slight misconception that I should clear up is that the Dawn War started, raged, and ended long ago, when the prime material plane was young. It may have its origin at that point of time, but the Dawn War was also waged across time itself. So while it started and finished long ago, as the primordial plane progresses through time, the Dawn War just arrives every now and then, and some primordial or god or group of either suddenly appear and all hell breaks loose before they finish that particular mysterious skirmish and all vanish into the dimension of time again. It's quite possible in the D&D multiverse to run into and even perform missions and receive boons from gods who are supposed to be dead. Dying doesn't stop a past self from travelling forward in time beyond the era that it was alive. Same thing goes for the primordials, so while Imix, the elemental lord of fire, may be dead at some points, he can still show up and cause a ruckus thanks to the Dawn War and quite a lot of very chaotic and unbridled time travel. As the Catastrophic dragons made their pacts and took on new and more powerful forms, often brutally, they became wildcard agents and have acted for either side of the conflict, most acting as agents of destruction for the primordials mainly, but also acting on their own whims and wishes, dealing out death and supreme levels of violence to either side. So, Catastrophic dragons have a very well-deserved reputation for being highly unpredictable and extremely dangerous. As the dragons approach different primordial powers, they receive different elemental enhancements. So there are many different types of Catastrophic dragons, each identified by the form of elemental power they generate and have mastery over. So let's take a look at what those known types are and what they still have in common with the different types of true dragons. Like true dragons, Catastrophic dragons are long-lived creatures with distinct stages of life that determine their abilities. They begin life as an egg, but not a biological egg. In fact, it takes a significantly hard DC 22 Arcana skill check to even recognise that the object is an egg at all. Really, it's more like an explosive, a very unstable elemental explosive. When they do explosively hatch, they have the general shape of a dragon, however they are basically elementals in draconic form. They don't require food, water or air to survive, although they are known to devour victims just out of a draconic instinct still raging within them. They are also prone to eating magic items if you're not too careful where you point them. What they do consume as a food source technically is raw elemental power caused by them, so when they set off an earthquake or a firestorm or tornado, they soak up some of that power as they move through it. Their meals are literally disaster areas, leaving behind ruin and desolation as they wander off to snooze somewhere for hopefully a decade or so. Normal dragons release elemental power through their breath weapon, while Catastrophic dragons don't have that restriction. They release power through various magical auras and area of effect attacks, as well as devastating enchanted melee attacks. And it has to be said and stressed that another thing common to Catastrophic dragons is insanity, at least from biological mortal beings' perspective. For example, Avalanche dragons believe that their ultimate goal is to kill death itself and revive all the dead members of the Draconic pantheon. Most of the breeds will react with intense anger and violently attack to stop any divine entities from stealing elemental power that is rightfully the property of the primordials, even if they are enemies of the primordials themselves, and they will target genies for retribution, as well as singling out Genasi for daring to be infused or have power over elemental energy, while at the same time being allied with other genies, which would seem to you or me to be somewhat hypocritical, considering that the dragons have a biological origin themselves, so they share many common traits with genies. But Catastrophic dragons are more elemental than not now, so they are basically guarding their turf. It's not a good idea to have elemental entities trapped in magical devices that draw off their power anywhere near the Catastrophic dragons, for instance. They will not tolerate that even one little bit. Earthquake dragons are offended by cities, actively targeting them for demolition in order to return the land to unblemished elemental purity. They have a skewed view of other dragons who see the elemental power within non-catastrophic dragons as stolen property, and that is all the justification they require to murder any other dragon that dares to confront them. Other dragons, of course, see the catastrophic dragons as abominations. They would tell other beings that these were dragons who were victims, who were captured and experimented on by the wicked primordials who have been driven insane by the unrestrained elemental power that was forced into and through them, burning away the god's divine spark that makes dragons the blessed and ordained rulers of all other beings. Fine rhetoric, but you won't see them or any other dragons going on hunts to eliminate these so-called abominations. They just avoid them like the plague for a damn good reason. That reason is a very long legacy of stupid self-righteous dragons getting absolutely brutalized. The epic dragons of cosmic power, like the prismatics, are, as always, more aloof and circumspect, reasoning that the important point is that dragons are extremely adaptable. They're all superior life forms, and no matter what, dragons must exist. Even the catastrophic dragons. And when a chromatic, metallic or gem dragon is killed by one of them or another dragon, it's just the strong weeding out the weak. This is fairly rich coming from the gigantic and super powerful prismatic dragons, but who's going to argue? Well, I am, I suppose. The process of transformation that created the catastrophic dragons involved prolonged exposure to extreme levels of elemental power. Thousands, possibly even millions of them died. Only a few survived, and of those, only a few were truly transformed into dragons of catastrophe. Consumed by elemental fury, their connection to the physical world is broken in a way that other dragons find abhorrent. Catastrophic dragons are no longer composed of the living flesh of mortal creatures, they are made of elemental matter. Although they advance through the standard ages of dragonkind, catastrophic dragons do not echo the life cycle of the metallic and chromatic dragons. They do not mate, they do not lay eggs in the traditional sense, they do not brood over their young as do other dragons. You can't have dragonborn catastrophic dragons, for instance. Many of them have traits that have more to do with their elemental energy than any other draconic heritage, so they might have multiple heads or a lack of wings, twin tails, additional limbs, and so on. You might have volcanic dragons that have similar traits to red or black or blue dragons. It doesn't really matter. At times their form can look like leathery skin and scales, but it's not made of that same substance. This is clearly evident when it releases huge bursts of power as an aura effect and their flesh seems to dissolve or blast apart and then reform again immediately after. Also, when damaged, it's clear that they don't actually have scales and such. Small parts of their internal elemental essence can be ripped, severed and torn from them, which are actually referred to as scales, and they're a very hot commodity among wizards and alchemists. Losing these bits doesn't add to the injuries though. Catastrophic dragons can lose limbs, they can be severed from their body and a moment later a new limb has appeared, not healed or grown, but manifested from the raw elemental power within them. They have no internal skeleton, no internal organs, there is no physical distinction of each dragon's gender. All catastrophic dragons reproduce by way of raw elemental power. They are engines of destruction, they never need to sleep, but they do tend to spend long periods of relative inactivity, their internal energy seeming to recharge over time. When some other disaster strikes, it's usually enough to awaken them, their elemental energy building up enormously fast and the natural environment around them going crazy with regional shockwaves, superstorms, tremors and such that herald their arrival. Each breed of catastrophic dragon has its own reproductive cycle. Some, such as the Avalanche dragons and the Typhoon dragons, reproduce each year as changing seasons inspire the events for which they're named. Others operate on a far more intermittent schedule, imprinting only every few decades when natural disasters unfold. To see catastrophic dragon, the eggs usually imprint only when a dragon of at least adult age is present and participating in an elemental cataclysm. On rare occasions, however, this disaster of sufficient magnitude leaves behind such eggs even with no dragon present. It's almost like they've left behind some of their essence in the environment. So catastrophic dragon eggs can appear during the most fearsome episodes of elemental upheaval. For example, typhoon eggs might be found buried in coastal sands, left behind by the swirling foam of the most violent tempests. The rubble of a deadly tremor might hold the rough-shelled eggs of an earthquake dragon, scattered among a city's broken stones. Blizzard dragon eggs might appear as crystalline orbs found in the wake of a deadly winter storm. I should also note that catastrophic dragon eggs have a wildly varying rates of viability. So dragon eggs that imprint more often because they have more natural disasters that generate them have lower successes of survival rates. So their numbers stay consistent with the slower producing but more viable like volcano dragons and stuff. Moreover, the gestation period of catastrophic dragon eggs is not a fixed period of time. It depends on the frequency and intensity of elemental forces affecting the local environment. It's got very little to do with the dragons themselves. Eggs can normally be dormant for decades if untouched by the proper disaster, or they can hatch in a matter of months if the environment cooperates. So wildfire dragons may hatch quite quickly. Only a few of the many hundreds of eggs which might be generated from a season of wildfires may be viable, whereas volcanic dragons may have eggs that will hatch guaranteed next time there's a destructive volcanic event. On average, the smaller scale eggs are about 8 inches long and weigh about 5 pounds, but they can be much bigger, varying in size, even amongst the same species. The one feature that catastrophic dragon eggs share is the elemental power imbued within them. Each contains the potential strength, fury and capability for destruction of the dragon slated to one day hatch from it, but without the sentience to guide it or control it. That develops later. Combined with their rarity, this makes catastrophic dragon eggs as valuable as they are dangerous. For alchemists, they're essentially a nuclear pile of elemental energy. Of course, they're extremely dangerous. While a catastrophic dragon egg remains in the area where it's imprinted, it's relatively hardy and resistant to damage. It's waiting for the next storm or whatever. But when removed from its preferred hatching ground, it becomes a fragile liability. If not transported in the proper fashion, a catastrophic dragon egg can detonate, hatching prematurely to blast an area of land with elemental energy that lays waste to the surrounding area. With a bit of care though, knowledgeable characters can secure and transport dragon eggs with only minimal danger of mishap. I may make some additional videos covering each individual type of catastrophic dragon and some ones that I've been thinking about, but here are the various categories of them in brief of the known catastrophic dragons. Probably the worst are the volcanic dragons. They are extremely cruel, vicious, evil, vindictive and hate-fueled. They enjoy destroying cities and forests in particular, and they love the sound and smell of sizzling flesh as it becomes immolated. While they may rage and rant about ambition and power, rank and reputation, really all they care about is murdering as many creatures as they can. Volcanic dragons were the first of the catastrophic dragons to turn on the primordials and fight for the gods, and then promptly betrayed them and everyone else thereafter. To this day, volcanic dragons are regarded by the power brokers of the multiverse as the most dangerous and untrustworthy mercenaries available. Use them only if you dare, because although they have one-track minds that make them loyal for a time, invariably betrayal is coming. Their appetite for destruction is unshakable. Only similarly malevolent elemental creatures of flame can hope to have anything resembling a staple alliance with these creatures. Massive heat pumps from them at all times. They're fairly lousy at flying, but they can melt through bedrock and sort of swim fly through the planet's molten core. They emit huge plumes of toxic gases that are also highly flammable. Their bites can set victims on fire, and their claw attacks have an enchanted means of removing a victim's resistance to any fire damage, which is just wonderful for those who have had no idea that they could do such a thing. As well as extending out their toxic incendiary cloud, they can also detonate it with pinpoint precision, and they can cause fissures to open, spewing magma under the feet of their enemies. Wildfire dragons crave the destruction of life. They lay mostly dormant during the months where snow and rain prevail, but come the hot, dry summer months they rise, along with the rampaging infernos they create. Wildfire dragons spend their quiet time in shallow burrows dug out from grasslands or foothills graced with many softwood trees to ancient ruins beneath crowded city shanty towns with all those wooden slums. They're interested only in their territory and its inevitable need to be reborn by burning. So it's kind of a noble goal of theirs. Wildfire dragons may tolerate allied creatures at first, but will inevitably turn on them once any other opposition is reduced to ash and smouldering corpses. Wildfire dragons are surrounded by an aura of withering heat, intense enough to kill. With fiery claws and bites, they move with the speed of a flash fire, their serpentine bodies weaving and leaping, pushing walls of fire before them as they grow older. They can master this fire to such a point that they can hurl fireballs. These creatures fight from the air, where they swoop down as a blast of living flame that burns all it touches. A wildfire dragon focuses its wrath on creatures that penetrate its scorching aura to deal it actual physical damage. While foes mass against it, the dragon howls with delight as it easily moves through them, positioning itself so that its aura and its physical attacks destroy as much as possible. The freedom to move is vital to a wildfire dragon, which knows that its foes have no more chance to contain its fury than they have of grappling fire itself. As such, it reserves its most potent and ferocious attacks for enemies that attempt to immobilize or restrain it. Wildfire dragons are indiscriminate in their choice of targets, taking equal delight in watching all creatures burn. Avalanche dragons are known as the Death Slide dragons to the mountain orc tribes, and as Smothering dragons to the Goliaths that live below the peaks where they commonly lair. An elemental accumulation of jagged stone shards and blinding dust, an avalanche dragon shows a draconic form only in broad outline. Its wings are twin clouds of dust and glittering sand. Its eyes, fangs, and claws are crystal shards flashing with static discharge. It's constantly shrouded in a shifting mass of stone and rock, and it's one of the few that can be allied with in regard to specific types of shared enemies. So if you are forming an alliance based on your hatred of the undead and the Shadowfell, well, then you're in luck. They are a breed that have very long memories and hold some very serious grudges, and can form a common bond with other creatures based on those. Avalanche dragons openly ally with other kinds of catastrophic dragons when they can, especially the earthquake and volcanic dragons whom they feel a certain natural kinship. Avalanche dragons might come together under the leadership of a creature other than a catastrophic dragon if that individual channels sufficient amounts of raw elemental power. No catastrophic dragon can be said to embody a true sense of balance or serenity, though the avalanche dragons sometimes come close. They delight in the crashing roar of the landslide and burying prey beneath the mountains of stony debris. They also enjoyed long periods of rest, during which time they take in the view of the surrounding lands above their lairs, content to watch and dream for months or years at a time. They're composed of a whole lot of rocks. They can also hold a lot of elemental air energy, which makes them agile and very fast in flight, as you would expect an avalanche to be. Speedy! As with most catastrophic dragons, they are formidable close range, and their aura effects attacks are pretty formidable, but it's not until they've been around for many centuries that they've gained the ability to hurl boulders with any sense of accuracy. The blizzard dragons are found in the plane of Pandemonium quite often, as well as the elemental planes and the countless worlds of the primordial plane, but they're also more common than you would expect in the Feywild, often allied with the Fey of the Winter Court, in that parallel dimension, of course. One could almost call them the social butterflies of the catastrophic dragons, at least among those who have truly tyrannical and cruel hearts. All blizzard dragons have an aura of freezing cold, gale force winds that surround and sweep would-be attackers away or mislead them, giving them a tactical edge. Their claw and bite attacks are freezing cold, and their bite attacks in particular temporarily entomb victims in a shell of ice. They can unleash all sorts of nasty cold effects, including if you are stupid enough to direct a blast of cold at them, it will basically rebound and blind you. The blizzard dragons band together with other creatures of cold, including frost giants and arctic beasts, winter wolves and that sort of thing. Blizzard dragons mould their environment to their will, whether sculpting the snow and glaciers on a mountainside or filling an underground chamber with ice. They have a strong hatred of the Shadowfell along with the avalanche dragons, and would be happy to murder the Raven Queen, if they could get their hands on her, due to a lot of bad blood and history between them and her, which I'm not going to go into the details of. Earthquake dragons are true menaces to civilization. The arrival of an earthquake dragon in a region is heralded by minor tremors. In subsequent days, the shaking grows increasingly violent. Soon buildings are crumbling and people are disappearing into chasms that spontaneously appear in roads and fields. Hungry chasms. Once the dragon has ruined a city and chased away or eaten the inhabitants, the earthquake dragon might dwell in the ruin for months, digesting its food and basking in the destruction that it's wrought. Then it tires of the sedentary activity and moves on to the next region to repeat the process. They're one of the only catastrophic dragons that has any interest in material things. They just happen to have a lust for precious gems, and it may be possible to negotiate with them in exchange for such fabulous treasures. Otherwise, they are temperamental and will turn on most allies, except for the rocky creatures like Galadur, elementals and such. The less digestible the ally, the better their chances. Earthquake dragons are considered to be clumsy at flying, but they have impressive ground movement and burrowing speed. Also, in combat, they shake everything around them with their aura of tremors, which makes it very hard to get near them. Tornado dragons were the creations of the evil elemental lord Yan Si-bin. This is one of the few ones which I'm going to go into any detail with. As with all the catastrophic dragons, they have some origin connected to the various elemental powers and primordial entities. In the case of the tornado dragons, some of them are still loyal to Yan Si-bin for the power that he bestowed on them. They are the most vicious enemies of the metallic dragons and the god Bahamut, whom Yan Si-bin tasked them with destroying somehow. Other tornado dragons have managed to escape this toxic quest and instead spend their existence just destroying whatever the hell they like. Tornado dragons have a deep scorn for the worlds of the primordial plane and have little hesitation in destroying any part of it, including those that have devoted their lives to the worship of the tornado dragon and its tremendous power. So cultists. As soon as the dragon tires of their gifts and antics, it will destroy them as well. Tornado dragons will only ally themselves with creatures of elemental planes and beings who have significant powers over the air, such as storm giants, typhoon dragons, and some genies. And air elementals, of course. They are frequently the target of demons, who seek to capture them and direct their destructive power, and Pazuzu, the demon prince of the lower aerial kingdom, has been a particular thorn in their side for thousands and thousands of years. Angels and other celestial servants of the gods find the tornado dragons equally vexing and keep a very wary eye out for them when they're visiting primordial worlds. In combat, the tornado dragon's presence is heralded by wild and spontaneous storms, Black clouds pile up on the horizon, and a keen eye might spot the dragon flying along the leading edge. A swirling column of wind tethers the dragon to the storm, growing in intensity as it rips through trees, buildings, and anything else in its path. Like any natural storm, the tornado dragon produces torrential rains, hail, lightning, and damaging winds. The dragon's physical attacks are fearsome to be sure, but its channeling of the storm's power greatly increases its devastation. Outside of combat, and their frequent visits to the ground to pulverize herds or animals and rip shredding paths through forests, the tornado dragons simply drift through the air, almost gentle and beautiful as they revel in flight in the air itself. If they happen to spot a metallic or chromatic dragon nearby, though, they fly into an instant and lethal rage. Typhoon dragons are born of elemental water and lightning, taking the form of dragon-shaped waves of water, surrounded by storm clouds and violent winds. Even other catastrophic dragons consider the Typhoon dragons to be insane, as they are the embodiments of the storm and the worst ravages of the sea, wantonly destructive, mercurial engines of annihilation, hindered only by their insatiable and unpredictable curiosity. They like to get into things. Like all the catastrophic dragons, their emotions hold a much stronger role in their behaviour than their intelligence does, which is not to say they're stupid, it just means that eventually, no matter how logical an alliance, deal or favour may be, the dragon's need to destroy will shatter whatever patience or instinct is making it withhold its power. Surrounded by an aura of grasping wind, it's very difficult to either approach or flee from a Typhoon dragon, and using lightning or thunder attacks on the creature merely triggers a reciprocal storm outburst directed right back at you, shattering the assailant's body with thunder or striking them down with lightning. Typhoon dragons can deliver electrified bites or kindle a powerful and violent outburst of thunder and lightning with their personal storms. They can also manipulate the sea or other large bodies of water to create massive waves, whirlpools, and such just by moving through them at great speed. The mercurial nature of the sea manifests in these otherwise pure engines of destruction as an insatiable and unpredictable curiosity, sometimes damned creepy. The Typhoon dragon might grow fascinated with something as unique as an undersea ruin in its territory, or as mundane as a victim speaking with a peculiar accent while begging for mercy. An unusual piece of jewellery, an unfamiliar race, a snippet of half-heard lore, or other peculiar cultural tradition. Any of these things can grab the Typhoon dragon's attention. This curiosity could pass in a few questions, or the dragon could abandon short-term goals in favour of learning everything it can regarding its new fascination. This curiosity inspires Typhoon dragons to become collectors of eccentricities, from Sahuagin art to religious writings to locks of hair, animal carapaces, or broken bits of sunken ships. Their artistic appreciation also focuses very heavily on the beauty of destruction left in the wake of massive natural storms, which is something they try to emulate as often as possible. Sure, they may murder thousands of coastal people, but it's art. It's one of them invites you to witness a rendition of thunder poetry. They make this with lightning bolts, so it's best to be avoided if you can. While it is the end of the listed types of catastrophic dragons that I have for you today, I certainly invite you to create many more, as the lore indicates that there are many different versions of these terrible beings. For instance, a catastrophic dragon of plague, or a dragon of famine, has some interesting and horrific possibilities. Perhaps there's catastrophic dragons of what? I look forward to hear your ideas in the comment section down below. Please hit the like button if you made it this far, subscribe if you like what I do, check out my Subscribestar or Patreon for all the full scripts for these videos, buy some Teespring merchandise, wear your geek with pride, and as always, thanks for listening, and I'll be back with more for you very soon.